Well, my role is to oversee the compliance and inspection sector at EMA, and within the sector we have a number of activities. The key one is to coordinate inspections, so that's good clinical practice, pharmacovigilance, and good manufacturing practice, and also some good laboratory practice inspections in support of the centralized procedure, which is the marketing authorization process we run. In support of those activities within Europe, we also have a role in the harmonization of inspection procedures, and consequently we run a good clinical practice, good manufacturing practice, and pharmacovigilance inspectors working groups where all of the national competent authority inspectorates are represented, because EMA itself doesn't do inspections. We work with the inspectors of the member states to do those. We have an overall confidentiality arrangement with the FDA, between FDA, the European Commission and the European Medicines Agency, and that's in place since 2004. One of the key areas that we can work together on is in the field of inspection, and this is particularly important because of the globalization both of manufacturing and of the conduct of clinical trials. And therefore, since in the case of clinical trials 2009, we have had a joint GCP initiative, which has actually just come to the completion of its 18-month pilot in March, and we'll be carrying on now. It's been successful and issuing a report quite soon. And the idea was that we work together and bring together the inspectors of the EU and of the FDA to do a number of joint inspections so that we can learn each other's processes and build confidence in the way we operate. Also have observed inspections where if the FDA is doing an inspection in Europe or the Europeans are doing inspection in the US, the home party comes and watches what's happening rather than actively participating. But again, it's a learning process. But basically that's to build confidence in each other's processes so that in the future, and we already are starting to do this, if the FDA says we're going to go and we're going to inspect these studies and we'll go to this site here in the US and this site in the Ukraine perhaps, and we'll say, okay, well, we'll not duplicate and turn up at the same place, we'll go somewhere else. So we might go to France and go to a site in India. And then we can all share the information. We get greater inspection coverage for the same resource. Sponsors and investigators aren't inspected 2 or 3 times by different regulators. And hopefully that will increase the coverage and the message from the inspectorates from the US and Europe. The second really important aspect is that by working together, and the US inspectors join our European training courses, and some European inspectors have been to the US, we start to harmonize our approach and our thinking on key issues, and we've also exchanged draft guidance. They've joined discussions in our working groups by teleconference and vice versa, so it's been a very successful approach, and we have an analogous approach on good manufacturing practice, which David Coburn perhaps has spoken to you about. Well, I think the issue with globalization is that increasingly from a European's perspective, and indeed this applies for any regulator in the world, wherever you sit in the world as a regulator, most of the clinical trials that you receive in marketing applications, most of the manufacturing that takes place for products is taking place in territories outside of the jurisdiction of your regulatory system. So 2/3 of whatever you're regulating as an end product is either developed in clinical trials or manufactured somewhere else in the world. And that's going to apply whether you're sitting in Europe, whether you're sitting in the US or in Argentina or in China or wherever. So it's a challenge for all regulators that we really have to start working together, understanding each other, because whoever's in charge in the place where the trial is run or the factory operates has to ensure from before that trial is set up or before the factory is built that they have a good framework, that it will be well regulated, and to carry out supervision. And if we all can build trust and understanding and confidence with the other regulatory systems, help each other with training, harmonize requirements, then that safety of the supply chain or of the conduct of trials can be much better assured. The clinical trial register, as we now call it, was actually set up under the Clinical Trial Directive in Europe in 2004 as a confidential database for communication between the national competent authorities of Europe, the Commission and the agency on clinical trial oversight, and particularly the authorization of clinical trials with investigator sites in Europe. Now, trials in Europe are authorized by the member states. The agency isn't directly involved other than running this database. and a related safety database, EUDravigilance clinical trial module. Now, that database was established as a confidential one, but then articles in the regulation establishing EMA were amended, and also the pediatric regulation brought in clauses, both of which open the confidentiality and allow us to put a certain amount of information in the public domain. So we are now able to put in the public domain a data set for all clinical trials involving pediatric populations with an investigator site in Europe, or listed in a PIP, which is a pediatric investigation plan, plus all clinical trials in adults other than purely phase 1, purely adult trials. So that the large part of trials with investigator sites in Europe are now being put in the public domain. And I think as of today, there are about 14,800 trials on the register. We opened it on the 22nd of March, and we've been progressively releasing data which had been entered prior to opening the register since the 1st of May 2004. So we're about 2/3 of the way there. We have about 21,000 trials already in the system in total that can go into the public domain, and then that will progressively grow as new trials join the system. I think from the point of view of key challenges, the fact that the database started life as a confidential database and the register is now a public view on some of that data means that the data goes through the national competent authorities into the system, which in one respect is very good in terms of control, of ensuring it's there and ensuring the trials are released in public at the time of authorization. The downside is that obviously for each competent authority there would potentially be a lot of maintenance in updating that data, so we don't have the sponsors individually updating their information, which would allow us, for instance, to have the date of enrollment commencing, the date that enrollment finishes, and other information updated on a more regular manner, because each sponsor in himself has 1 to 20 trials to update, whereas a national authority might have 500 or 1,000, so it's a different scale. But I think that's something we'll develop. We've got plans in next year's version, starting in the new year, to open up some of the data maintenance to sponsors, although we have to revise some guidance to allow that, and obviously build the software. For the registry itself, the key issues are to assure the data quality going into EUDRACT, and therefore the data quality that appears in the public domain, and secondly to improve the ability of the public to find what they're looking for, so to enhance the search tools, particularly in the areas of linking thesauruses and dictionaries to the search tools, so that if somebody, for instance, puts in the word cancer, the system will also look for neoplasm and other related terms, possibly also in some other languages, depending on the thesauruses we have available. So it's helping the patient or the healthcare provider or the researcher find what's in there, because if we have 21,000 trials, you need to have a good search tool to find what you're looking for.